Still good though. The treble is all the way down. Top. Treble. Yeah.
Is this all the way down?
All the way down, yeah. So put it up a little bit.
In the middle. Get your have a stand for this too.
Yeah, we got a copy in the front too.
You mind if I like lay it down?
Yeah, put it whatever. It's okay.
Zoom or something.
It might be better than nothing, right?
Take care. All right, you too.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa. Just letting you know that we'll be getting started shortly. If you want to come take a seat up front or at the table, please do so. If you're about to order some food, you can go ahead and get that taken care of. We'll be getting started shortly. Thank you so much.
No, I have heard about it too. Until I cannot really buy another book. She does a lot of research. So reading that, I just read Harold Sawyer. Have you ever read that? Lady of Violence. She wrote it back in the 90s, but she was thinking about her next. And the stuff she was talking about, it's almost eerie. I did it on as a good one take, but I'm pretty sure I have it at home. I do it this one. So that's right. But a bunch of people really play. I did it too. Because I got something tonight. I will not leave. Yeah, which is crazy. There's an Octavian book right there that I don't know. Adult food, right? Yeah. Yeah, so when I was the book.
It's good.
She is the one who I know. She said she was make it tonight. She had
We got one on.
Oh, I was just making sure you know we're about to start.
Okay.
Just asking some questions.
Are you gonna go right now? Yes. No, please, please.
How you gonna do? You may come up after you say.
Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing out there? I can't hear you. Okay, that sounds a little better.
What's up?
All right, when I say hey, you stay home.
Oh.
I didn't say hey yet. Oh, I thought it was black people in here. Come on. When I say hey, you stay home. Hey. Hey. All right, okay. Y'all sound alive out there. My name's Michaela. I'm the store manager / one of the event coordinators here at Sankofa Video and Books. And is it anyone's first time here? Okay. Well, welcome to Sankofa, first of all. Sankofa is named after an Adinkra symbol. It is an Adinkra symbol, which means to go back and fetch it. Adinkra symbols come from the Kan people of Ghana, West Africa. It is also the namesake of the movie Sankofa. I don't know if you all are familiar with it. Made by Haile Garima, co-produced by Sharikiana Garima. They are both the founders of Sankofa Bookstore. We proudly sell books by and about people of African descent and Pan-Africanism and general Blackness. And that's why we're so happy to have our guest here, Andre Henry, and he's about to serenade us, I think. I'm really looking forward to that. Before he does that, I would like to read his bio and a little bit about the book that he will be answering questions on, which is All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. I really like that title. Andre Henry is an award-winning musician, writer, and activist. He's a columnist for Religion News Service and the author of the newsletter Hope and Handfuls. He's a student of nonviolent struggle, having organized protests in Los Angeles, where he lives, and studied under international movement leaders through the Harvard Kennedy School. His work in pursuit of racial justice has been featured in The New Yorker and The Nation and the Liturgist podcast. And you can find out more information at andrehenry.co. And a little bit about his book. I want to read an excerpt from the back that was written by John Archibald, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and author of Shaking the Gates of Hell. It says, Andre Henry's words come on like his music, pleasant to the ear, deeply moving to the heart. As he looks into himself and all the white friends I couldn't keep, with the same unflinching honesty he uses to examine an anti-Black world, he reveals a hard but ultimately joyful evolution from complacency and understanding racism, even when aimed at people just like him, to embracing activism as a vital part of who he must be. So without any further ado, we have author Andre Henry. Woo!
The first words of my book are some of the lyrics from one of my songs called Delusional, so I usually always share that at the top of these, so here we go. It must be good to be you. You only believe what you want, and anything that you don't know, well, that just couldn't be true. Mister, you know it all. You got a college degree, So you're impressed with your work. You think the problem is me, disturbing your peace, but I'm living your world, where everyone is able to be anything that they want. There's a fence between the world and me, not everybody sees. So now I will not dry my tears for you, just so that you can smile. I'm not delusional. I smell the smoke and you don't. I will not sing a lie for you while you close your eyes. No, I'm not delusional. No, I'm not delusional. You think for yourself. Everyone else has a lens. As far as your eyes can see, that must be where the world ends. You think you're able to teach a lesson you haven't learned. You're drawing maps on the sea, yeah, to places you've never gone. Oh, I've heard it all before. You're as original as the rain in spring. You're just a child of your world. There's an accent to the way that you think. It isn't that you need. So now I will not dry my tears for you, just so that you can smile. I'm not delusional. I smell the smoke and you don't. I will not sing a lie for you while you close your eyes. No, I'm not delusional. No, I'm not delusional. No, no, I'm not delusional.
Another round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to bring on Pastor Delonte for our author discussion, and then following that, we'll have a Q&A with the audience. And if you're interested in purchasing the book, you can do so by meeting me back at the counter and then coming up and have it signed by the very talented Andre Henry.
Y'all give it one more time for Andre Henry. My name is Pastor Delonte. I pastor Peace Fellowship Church in Deanwood, and I have the privilege of having known my brother Andre for about 8 years now. We spent a lot of time together not in grad school when we were in seminary together out in LA, but I think things got real. We ended up in the streets of Pasadena protesting and beginning to really think and dream about what a different world could be like. So I just want to say thank you, brother, for making time to hang out in DC tonight and making time for just my hometown, man. I just appreciate you making time to come out tonight. Andre flew in all the way from Medellin, Colombia, in part to be at a local retreat out in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And when I found out he was going to be here, I said, man, just come through. We'll bring some people together and just just try to like pull something together. And so I want to really thank Michaela and Christine and the team at Sankofa Bookstore for making time and making this tonight possible as well. Give it up for Sankofa. Please make sure you grab pastry, grab some coffee, grab some tea, grab something. But tonight, we're really here to hear from you, brother. So just wanted to give you space for folks who maybe are being introduced to your work for the very first time. We heard a little bit about your bio. If you could just maybe open us up with just like a reading and then just kind of the journey that led you to writing this book. Well, thank you, Delonte, for inviting me to do this and for working with Sankofa to tell people about this book, my first book. And thank you all for being here. It's not my first time in DC. I always love it when I get to come through here. And thanks for giving me another excuse to do so before I leave the country again. So I'll tell you a little bit about this book, and then I'll read. It's like a 5 or 6 minute reading from the second chapter. But I tell people that this is a Trojan horse. I do everything as though I won't get another chance to do it again, because that's real. Sometimes you get invited to speak places, you don't get invited back to speak there again. And I don't know if I'll get another book deal. Oh, I know now, but I didn't know that before. And so this book came from a blog post that I wrote in 2019 that went viral. And it was called "To All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep," that blog post, because I'd actually written it to a bunch of folks that I had cut off because I had been going through a political awakening of sorts, waking up from the colonized common sense that the empire tries to foster in us. Paulo Freire talks about how the oppressed often have a bit of the oppressor in them, because that's the goal, right? I see somebody, you read Pedagogy of the Oppressed back there, right?
30 years ago.
Okay. And so I was waking up from that. And so some context, also before we get to the Q&A and somebody asked me something rude about white people, I have white people in my family. My grandmother, her family is from Cuba, and her people are white and light-skinned Cubans, and they cut off my grandfather because he was Afro-Jamaican. So I never knew anything about Cuba because of that. My family is mostly from Jamaica, so I have white cousins in Britain that look just as white as some of y'all in this room. You'd never believe it. So I grew up in a multicultural context. And especially one of those spaces was the evangelical church. That called themselves multi-ethnic, but is culturally white, right? A bunch of black and brown people at my home church in Atlanta. Never had a black pastor, So anyway, for years I had started speaking up about what my experience actually is like in the world as a black man, and the folks that I had called friends and family my whole life really came at me really hard. And so I wrote this blog post to them in 2019 to kind of address some of the things they've been saying about me, like Andre's a racist, he hates white people, all this. And I wrote this blog post to say, I don't hate y'all, I just can't be around y'all. And that post went viral, and a literary agent reached out to me and said he feels like there's a book in there. Now, I didn't see the book, but I said, you sell books for a living, so if you feel like there's a book in there, then I'll try to write it if you help me. And that was how that came together. So what I did in this book, part of my journey is, in 2016, after I watched Philando Castile bleed to death in front of his daughter and his girlfriend, I felt provoked by the question, how do ordinary people organize to change the world? Because I didn't know much about social change. I didn't know much about, organizing or revolutions or nonviolent struggle, but I knew that we have some predecessors who have fought this monster before, and things at least changed somewhat for a while, you know. And so I went on a journey to understand everything that I could. And so I ended up starting reading Henry David Thoreau all the way up to movement, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement leaders, nonviolent revolutions around the world, and started befriending people who've actually led revolutions in other countries, toppled dictators, taken on multinational corporations, and won campaigns against them. But nobody knows me as an international movement leader or nothing. So I knew that I knew the publisher wanted a book, would have been satisfied with a book that was just like, this is what these white people did to me, and this is what white people need to stop doing. They would have been happy with that book. So I did write that book, but I made sure that I put all that information that I learned along the way of some of those people that I talked to you about. So every chapter, there's a movement lesson. There's a lesson about how do ordinary people change the world, and how can Black people live a little bit freer on an individual level. So without further ado, I'm gonna read you a little bit of chapter 2. We won't get into the movement lesson in it because the chapters are too long to do that. So, but I hope you enjoy it. This is chapter 2. It's called The Whole World is Stone Mountain. I was raised in the shadow of Confederate Mount Rushmore in a small Georgia town called Stone Mountain. The place gets its name from a giant piece of quartz that stands about a mile high at the edge of town. The mountain's north face hosts the largest bas-relief carving in the world, a giant depiction of Confederate Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and Confederate President Jefferson Davis on horseback. It was commissioned by Klan sympathizers who'd initially hoped to include a parade of Klansmen in the carving. At 190 feet across and 90 feet tall, it's the largest Confederate monument in the country. The modern Ku Klux Klan first set fire to a cross on that very rock. On the 4th of July, my sweet mother, a hard-working Jamaican immigrant, took my siblings and me to picnic at Stone Mountain Park. As night fell, she spread a blanket on the damp grass at the mountain's base and passed around half-frozen Capri Suns as we prepared to watch the famous laser show spectacular, where the generals go dark and fast-paced cartoons are projected against the mountainside to popular music. As the show began, Mom, Mackie we called her, couldn't stop grinning. She leaned in close with a smile and said, "There's a part where they make the soldiers move." She seemed as excited about the imminent resurrection of General Lee as most Americans are about the fireworks grand finale. I was excited too, imagining a kind of night at the museum situation where those stone sentinels would peel themselves away from the rock and dance to Crisscross's Jump. After a few cartoons set to country songs I was too young and Black to recognize, the show paused. The lights dimmed. The sound of a rolling snare drum came dragging its feet through the speakers. It was followed by the voice of Elvis Presley singing, "I Wish I Was in the Land of Cotton. Old times are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland." As the music crescendoed, a laser began to slowly trace the carved figures until they were all standing in multicolored stenciled glory. Then the flickering silhouette of General Lee, I kid you not, turned his gaze on us mortals below, put on his hat, kicked his horse, and began to ride. Jackson and Davis followed as Elvis changed choruses, "Glory, glory, hallelujah, his truth is marching on." At first, the three men's steeds took a dignified pace. Then General Lee spurred his horse into a gallop, and the other Confederates followed suit. Lee drew his sword and held it high above his head, and as the three rebels turned toward us in full-on charge, the sound of hundreds of people hooting and clapping and cheering filled the air. In hindsight, it seems odd that people would commemorate America's birthday by applauding three men who once declared war on the country. Even odder is the memory of my Black mother wiggling her hips at the thought of a family picnic on the very ground where the KKK was resurrected, all while I Wish I Was in Dixie played in the background. If Mackie had recognized the laser show for what I do now, white supremacist pageantry, she might have marched our family right out of that neo-Confederate theme park and across the Caribbean Sea in a fury to raise us in her home country. But none of us were furious. because we didn't know the history. There was no mention of the ties between Stone Mountain and the Klan in Stone Mountain Park. They covered it up. In Stone Mountain, the racist content of mundane American life was obscured by a big lie told throughout the white world. The lie the white world tells is racism is not a problem here, no matter where here may be. White people from the southern U.S. claim they're not racist because they're not members of the Proud Boys. Northern whites claim they aren't racist because they're not Southerners. European whites claim they're not racist because they're not Americans. Latino whites claim they're not racist because they're not Europeans or Americans. Nevertheless, the white world stands guilty of a crime of unfathomable scope. Some call it the Ma'afa, a Swahili word meaning something like great disaster, referring to the 15 million indigenous Africans violently abducted from their homelands to be sold as beasts of burden in the New World, the so-called New World. They were held as captives in work camps, tortured and terrorized for generations. Their descendants have continued to suffer through endless innovations of racial violence throughout history, including apartheids and poverty, police brutality and surveillance, imperialist wars, and outright terrorism. The Ma'afa's body count is innumerable. That's why some scholars call it the Black Holocaust. Contrary to what people love to say about racial violence, that it springs from ignorance or blind hatred, the Ma'afa wasn't and isn't senseless. The crime was undertaken for a reason: profit. Over and over again in their writings about the slave trade, white men spoke of how they must use the sweat and suffering of enslaved Africans to build their banks and textile industries, their ships and plantation homes, and to produce whatever else they needed to buy or sell: coffee, tea, sugar, rum, cotton, indigo. It was just business. Much of the world is implicated in the crime and the cover-up. Britain couldn't have become great without their work camps in Jamaica. But British schools don't spend a lot of time teaching about the violence of the British Empire. In 2005, the French government tried to pass legislation that urged schools to emphasize the so-called positive role of colonialism, while schools glossed over the Black rebellion that ended French enslavement in Haiti. Brazil sweeps its history of anti-Black ethnic cleansing under the rug of racial democracy, suggesting that the same country that once ran the largest slave market in the world now has little to no racism. And in 2018, the Southern Poverty Law Center surveyed students from 1,000 high schools in the US and found that fewer than half of them had ever heard of the Middle Passage. My point is that complicity in this atrocity is as widespread as the denial. The many nations who've benefited so much from the Ma'afa lack the moral courage to confess that the breaking of Black bodies is a central part of their stories. Malcolm X once asserted that America is Mississippi to say that the nation couldn't write off racism as a Southern problem. I'm saying the whole world is Stone Mountain, and that it tries to write off anti-Black racism as a uniquely American phenomenon when it is really a global catastrophe. The signs are right in front of us, mountainous in scope, but they remain shrouded by the big lie. Wow, brother, wow. Incredible. Here we sit in the shadow of that great history. It is not lost on me at all that today is the 59th anniversary of the bombing of 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama, September 15th. Obviously, we are about 1.5 miles from the site where January 6th, 2021, the descendants of that legacy that you read about took the charge seriously that the president gave them, and they stormed the Capitol. They stormed the place that was built by our ancestors. It's not lost on me that we are across the street from Howard University, founded by freed slaves, the location of the Freedmen's Bureau, who was responsible for distributing and organizing our 40 acres and a mule that Andrew Johnson then decided conveniently something that we did not need. So we are shrouded, we are surrounded by our history and our current reality. And so much of that, I think, runs through the course of your book. When I think about, you talk about the apocalypse to start off the book, and talk about how you're writing because so many things, as you sang about, you're not delusional, but you just see things clearly. And I wonder what's your message? Because I think one of the reasons why your book resonates with me and with so many other descendants of enslaved Africans is because when I read the pages, I just hear my own experience, right? I just hear my own story. You know that my dad was raised 20 miles from Stone Mountain. And my mom was raised picking cotton in the cotton fields of Charleston, South Carolina. And so many of us, we see our own story in the pages of your book. And I'd love to hear what is your message? What is your message for Black folks living here in this city? In the context of all the history we have all around us, the reality that we walk out this place today, there will be 25 white people with dogs that will walk past on the street where, when I grew up here, this was Chocolate City. So talk to us. I'm very interested in your final thoughts around fighting or fleeing, and because I've been back in the city now, pastoring for almost 5 years, and I definitely struggle with the thought at times of just peacing out and following you to Medellin, or going to Belize, or going to Ghana, or somewhere. So just give us a sense of what's your word of encouragement. I know that your book is also about hope and hard pills. So we know the reality. Talk to us a little bit about the hope and the hard pills that you want for us to walk in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I do everything like it's the only chance I have. I wrote this book like it might be the only chance I have to write a book. And so because of that, it covers such a wide range of questions. So what I tried to do here is take a bunch of, I'm trying to decide like how adult my language can be right now. But just how much bullshit I can take off the table. Because we are given we are told that there's a certain way that we have to go about trying to change our situation. And we're usually told that by the same people who are invested in our oppression, right? I think it was Assata Shakur who said, only a fool listens to his oppressor tell him how to pursue his liberation, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And so throughout the book, you see me wrestling with those lies and breaking free of them. I want for every Black person who has ever labored under those lies to have them exposed and to hear them and to see that clearly and say, oh my gosh, I was told that. And to not only hear somebody telling them that that thing is wrong, but have someone to give them the statistics, the history, and all of that, that I spent years on my living room floor, bedroom, or on my bed at 3 a.m. studying to say, for instance, okay, let me back up just a step. I'm going to come back to that obstacle, that example that I had. But the big idea here in this book is that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We do not have to live we don't have to live under white dominance. And we don't have to live under white dominance because obedience is at the heart of political power. That political power rests in the consent of the ruled, right? I usually play Simon Says with people to illustrate this, and I write about this in my book. And I've been playing Simon Says with people all over the world now. I actually got to speak in Bogota and play Simon Says with these students. And I usually have them go through a thing. I say, okay, Simon Says, say your name. Everybody says their name. Simon Says, clap 3 times. Clap. And then I say, Simon Says, pull your pants down. And nobody pulls their pants down. And I ask them, okay, who has the power in the game then? Because before we started playing the game, everybody thought Simon had the power, but we all just experienced that the game breaks down when people disobey. Well, that's what our predecessors did. In the Montgomery bus boycott, in the freedom rides, all of that, there's this white supremacist regime that's saying, you have to conduct your lives this way, you can't go here, you can't go there, all this kind of stuff. And we decided to disobey together in an organized way. So my thing is, growing up, I didn't meet many revolutionary people, even Black people. I didn't meet I met a lot of Black liberals, and I'm not downing Black liberals at all or anything like that. I think we all were raised in a liberal mindset where we take freedom, democracy, equality as a given for granted. And I think that has kept a lot of Black people out of actually taking collective action together in a strategic way to break down the barriers to us living in our full dignity and full freedom. So the thing I hope when people get done reading this book that they walk away with is, it's possible, and leaving with certain principles that they otherwise wouldn't come across, because the book's about how nonviolent struggle works. Now, I'm writing about nonviolent struggle in the book. The principles about how nonviolent struggle works are not usually at Target, at Barnes and Noble, or they're just not that accessible. So that's why I put them in this book. So that's what I really hope people walk away with. And I'm trying to break down the myths about how change happens, how nonviolent struggle works, and also how we have to comport ourselves in order to pursue our freedom. So that brings me back to the example I was going to use. I'm trying to think of what the best example is, because I love doing this. I love being like, oh, that's bullshit. We didn't listen to that, one lie that we are told is that in order for things to change, we need everybody's participation. And the way that this lie is weaponized against us is people who are not interested in seeing Black people actually free, seeing Black liberation, will say, well, you need everybody, and that means that you have to speak to me a certain way if you want for me to join you. That's the way it's weaponized, right? Especially non-Black people, they love doing it. Don't fight, whether it's don't fight your allies or I'm completely against you. And in order for you to win my support, you have to comport yourself like a good Negro. Well, there was actually there are 2 things here. There are 2 principles of organizing that have been proven throughout time and space and revolutions. One is the 3.5% rule. So there was a study by Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Steffen that studied 627 conflict situations between 1900 and 2019 that found that no oppressive regime could withstand the sustained nonviolent resistance of just 3.5% of the population. 3.5% of the population has been able to topple dictators and completely revolutionize societies. So when people walk around saying, well, we need everybody, and that means that you have to tolerate like all of the nonsense that anyone will throw at you, no, we actually don't. And Black people make up 13% of the American population, which means if we wanted to, we could actually change our situation without anyone else's involvement. Now you have to take into consideration that no, we're not a monolith. So, you got black people that want to, you got Candace Owens. I don't know how else to say it. You got Candace Owens. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got that kind of Black person. You got Black nationalists and Black feminists and Black liberals and Black conservatives and got all kinds of Black people. So we can't just say just because we have 13%, we got it in the bag. But throughout time, we've seen that just a small portion of the population can actually get it done. Okay, so that's one thing so that's an example of, the way that certain things are put at us. Now, I want to add to that, there's another principle I talk about in another book, because here's another one that everyone tries to put the burden on us to do is, now we have to convert every racist to being anti-racist, or we have to convince everybody who doesn't agree, or pull your most adamant enemy into the movement. Get Tucker Carlson to march for Black Lives Matter, right? But it's been proven, this thing called the spectrum of allies, which I'm sure, Delonta, you know about, but this was news to me when I first read about it, when I was studying. And basically, people talk as though there's only two types of people. There are people who are for what you're for and against what you're for. But that's not true. There are people who are for what you're for. There are people who say that they're for what you're for, but aren't doing anything. There are people who don't even know what you're for, but they might be for it if you told them about it. There are people who are against what you're for and aren't doing anything about it. And there are people who are totally against you, right? And most movements are built by trying to get those people who don't know what you're for or aren't sure about what you're for, and moving them to the space where they're like, I at least agree with you. And then moving them from I agree with you to I agree with you and I'm working with you, right? So instead of, in my case, there's this whole chapter about how I found out that one of my really close friends in seminary was very racist, and I did not know until he started defending slavery in front of my face. And I was just like, I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. And he expected me to get dinner with him next week and talk to him about it. And I was like, and this Heineken commercial had came out at the same time, right? This Heineken commercial had basically that kind of thing. It was a trans person speaking with a transphobic person. It was a climate activist talking with a climate change denier. And they're sitting and having beers together and talking. And I looked at this commercial and I said, this is what America wants me to do. They want me to have dinner with this dude next week, but I don't see why I should give him an opportunity to say some white nonsense to me. Well, the spectrum of allies would say, that's a waste of time. You're not gonna, racism is the racists don't sleep. Racist power don't sleep. It doesn't take breaks. It doesn't take vacations. The speed and the magnitude at which we have to build a force able to intervene against racist power does not afford us the opportunity to sit down with people who need to be convinced that we have dignity, that we shouldn't be owned. We don't have time to do that. So that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to do in the book, and I'm using my own story. And I know I've talked a lot already. I don't even know if we have time to talk more, but that's what I'm trying to do in the book. And I just want to say, I talk about my own political awakening, which, was really vulnerable for me to do, because I feel like sometimes, we as Black people have this attitude that everybody knows everything about Black life and Black struggle just because you're Black, But I don't. And so I'm using my own ignorance and my journey out of that ignorance to help people to see how I learned these lessons.
Dope, man. Thank you, bro. Let me just ask one more question, and then I want to just open it up to our guests for tonight. Just as a pastor, that I preach about Jesus, the oppressed, the Palestinian Jew, the Black man whose back was up against the wall. I'm very interested, though, in just for folks who maybe didn't read about your decision to break up with white Jesus. Figured I should use this opportunity to give you the chance to just expound on that a little bit, and maybe invite folks to read that chapter when they get the book.
Yeah, so there's some levels to that. I think chapter 7 is break up with white Jesus, and I grew up in church. I grew up in the evangelical church. I was a church boy, very much so, and it was really a mind bend to talk to people that I had known as Christians my whole life. I mean, I grew up in Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is 7 miles outside Atlanta. So, as Prince Fanon talks about how sites of oppression are also sites of resistance. So, yeah, the Ku Klux Klan was founded in my neighborhood, not neighborhood, but city, if you want to call it that. But also, so is the capital city of the civil rights movement 7 miles away. You know, it's Dr. King's hometown, you know. So, I mean, I grew up going to the King Center, going to Dr. King's house and, you know, learning about, you know, these people were Christians. This man was a pastor, you know. This man standing on the Lincoln Memorial quoting Isaiah and stuff like that. So I just assumed that that's what that was a part of Christian faithfulness, you know. But I learned, you know, when I started speaking up about Black lives and stuff like that, and about organizing in particular, that was when like a lot of the white Christians that I grew up around got, you know, I don't know the right word. They just got really animated, right? they don't know the right word. They didn't like that a whole lot. They really wanted to shut that down. So I went through this whole thing, and I write about this in that chapter about, you know, when I was reading The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, he said that God is white. And if he cared about his loved one, if he cared about us so much, then why are we so down pressed, or something like that? I'm paraphrasing again. I don't know the exact quote. And when he said that, it hit me in the gut, and I really thought about it. Because for so much of my life, growing up in church, I had defended Christianity against the epithet that it's the white man's religion, right? And so now here I am with all these white people telling me, nah, this is our religion. And so I was really up one morning. I was supposed to be playing music at this church that was like 45 minutes away. And if I was going to get there on time, I should have left 15 minutes ago. But all I could think about was that James Baldwin quote, like, God is white. These people, when they go to this church, they're just singing to a larger version of themselves. They're imagining. There actually was a study about this, actually. They took a survey of white people describing what they think God looked like, and then they put a composite together, and he looked like an 18-year-old.
Chris Hemsworth with brown hair.
He didn't even look like, he wasn't even that handsome. Like, not Chris Hemsworth handsome. I mean, this was just Steve. You know what I'm saying? Like, you look at this man, you know this man's name is Steve. He can't be named nothing else but Steve. You know. So anyway, that's what I was going through that Sunday morning. I was like, these people are just singing to a larger version of themselves that they projected into the sky, and I can't go participate in that. So I went through this whole journey of, I abandoned all spirituality, first off, at first. That's where I was at first. I was like, because even the woo-woo people are like love and light, and this Black woman told me that all we had to do was listen to Tony Robbins. Because he's healing the bad people. That's what she said. So I was like, listen, I just can't deal with spirituality. All y'all think about some other stuff. I'm talking about the material conditions that Black people live under. And I went through a long journey. And reading other revolutionaries was very helpful in this, especially Assata Shakur, because she centered spirituality in the way that she talked about revolution. That brought me back to at least being open to spirituality and respecting the spiritualities of others, right? Because sometimes people get into movement spaces, or, you know, we feel woke, and I don't use that in a pejorative sense. I feel like woke belongs to us. I'll never let it go. So like, you know, but we get so woke that it's just like all we do is judge other people. So it brings about this sense of self-righteousness. So I got to the point where I was like, okay, what I do know is that there is a very influential, powerful, oppressive version of Christianity that has dominated and underdeveloped countries all over the world. I know that. I also know that there are pastors who walked the Trail of Tears with Native people. There are pastors who, you know, brought their people out to the streets and faced the water cannons and the dogs and were jailed and all that kind of stuff. And those are not the same Christianities. So if I can vibe with one of them, it's got to be that one. It's got to be Nat Turner's Christianity, you know, but it can't be Billy Graham's, you know what I'm saying? So
And on top of that, just also, I just think that whole experience just made God and spirituality just way bigger than it ever was for me, because I think that the institution, the fascist institution that we call the evangelical church, wants to really create a tight space around everyone, not just Black people, but everyone. They are authoritarian institutions that provide a theological basis and justification for authoritarian politics in the world, right? And breaking free of that just allowed me to not just see God in spirit as something bigger, but I'm telling you, I feel music deeper, food tastes better, and every life is just so much richer on the other side of that. So I encourage everyone to break up with white Jesus in the book. And I have stickers and t-shirts for it too. I'll be going through like the fast food line and sticking these break up with white Jesus stickers on the windows and stuff just to spread the gospel, you know what I'm saying?
I want to thank you for your for your brilliance, for your honesty. Thank you for the gift that this book is to the church and to those outside the church, to all of whom God loves, to all of those in whose image we are made. I just want to let's just thank Andre tonight. Let's just thank our brother. I want to provide some space for one of the things I love about Andre is he's always exhibited just curiosity. He's always been the type of person that asks hard and difficult and good questions. And so if there's this question that you're just sitting with tonight, I want to just make this our lab. Just make this our classroom. Let's just learn from each other. I see a question in the back. Bob in the back.
Greetings to this August body. Somebody's behind the mask, the bishop. That was a sidebar. The Vernon Johns. The Vernon Johns. The Vernon Johns. From Farmville, Virginia, for some of us, in some context. He did a piece that was called The Romance of Death. The 16th of May, 1965, at Rankin Chapel at Howard University. Oftentimes, a larger percentage, and I really love that 3.5%. My teachers taught me to use a 2.5%. So we're, D. Vernon Johns almost remind me how some people relate to Nanny Helen Burroughs in this city. I'm thankful for the use, let me do this. I'm thankful for the use of those who were in certain categories in that particular point in time. But how do we handle the Vernon John? And I'm not talking about Vernon Johns, the individual. I'm talking about the Vernon John who belonged to that set, that Nanny Helen Burroughs belonged to that same set, and some other people belong to that set. How do we get this over? And at the same time, use the hook for what you were talking about. Got it? I mean, how is that done and still remain, not you as an individual, but remain in the academy? Whatever academy it is. It can be the Academy of the Evangelical Church. It can be the Academy of the Church of God in Christ, which I was reared in. It can be a number of academies. It can be, how, I'm a gardener, okay? George Washington called the boy. There's a way to do something. However, the greater is the lesser known, and that which purports to be the unknown. How do we bring that to the fore, at the same time utilize that which I call it Acts 17:26. He created us of one blood, all nations, to dwell on the face of the earth, and have set the time, the boundaries, and the habitations. I'm not going to make this into a theological what happened, but there is context. And sometimes we're so busy with the hook rather than what is the purpose of the hook. And if I had a question, and I do, that would be how do you take the hook and use the hook as a manifestation rod to get that 2.5% or that 3.5%? And I'm not just doing intellectual, excuse the terminology.
I want to make sure that I understand your question. Do you feel like getting to?
I would ask a clarifying question for our elder. Your name is Baba O?
Baba Oduno.
Baba Oduno, yes. Okay, right.
T period, A period, Oduno. But
Yes,
guess
sir.
what?
Yes, sir.
Baba O is fine when I'm playing basketball because Oscar Robertson is the bigger one.
Right, Baba Oduno. Yeah. I remember. I know I've seen you in the street, and I know the last time I saw you. Trying to remember where we were. I think we were at the Poor People's Campaign. Last time I saw you was 2019. It's good to see you again tonight. So the clarified question I have is, what do you mean by the hook? And what do you mean when you say, I think I understand the point of how do we bring people from the 2.5 to 3.5? How do we bring people along? But what do you mean when you say the hook?
When I say the hook, people will pontificate that they know something about Michael or Martin Luther King II. How do we get, by using in that narrative, because we got 12 gates to the city and we're just using one with Michael or Martin Luther King. How do we get that 2.5%, that 3.5%, to be able to know who, in a very simplistic way, is Michael King the First, Daddy King? How do we get them to know Alberta Christie Williams, who married a king? And how do we get them to know A.D. Williams? And as well as I know his mother's name, because I recommend people to read the autobiography of Daddy King, because too often someone will say Malcolm X's dad was a Garveyite, and 30% of the time they will leave out Louise, Langdon, Norton, Little. And so since we know that, well, at least the 3.5%. How do we get those who are high profile as a hook to get people to know of the genealogical continuity of the warriors in the army of just natural law and the kingdom of God?
No, you sure? Absolutely.
Without taking up too much more time, the thing that I would say is, for me, the thing that is apparent is that we just have to tell stories differently. Oftentimes, the way that we talk about social change revolves around great individuals. And I think that does a huge disservice to us, because the thing that I keep trying to, or that I have tried to express to people and drill into people's head. Actually, I say it like this a lot, is that social progress has always been won by a few ordinary, organized, outraged people. They were not born on Mount Olympus. They were not visited in some angelic visitation. They were just ordinary, organized, outraged people. And that we all have a role to play. So, you know, the way that many people tell the story of the civil rights movement is Dr. King won a wrestling match against the head of the KKK or something and ended segregation and ascended into heaven. It's completely fantastical and revolves around this individual. Even I was just at the Harriet Tubman Museum, and it was really interesting to see the way that people talked about Harriet Tubman, about Mama Harriet, because her story got absorbed into the larger common sense that we have. And so people just started talking about her as a great individual that overcame adversity. No, like, I mean, yes, but no. Like, she was a part of a larger network of people working to liberate people from slavery, which she could not have done by herself, and she did not do by herself, you know, as wonderful and as great and as courageous as she was. And the same for the usual suspects. So I think that my shorter answer, I'm going to cut this shorter because I want other people to be able to ask questions, is that we have to change the way that we tell stories. We have to talk about Vernon Johns when we talk about Dr. King, and we have to talk about E.D. Nixon, and we have to talk about Joanne Robinson, and we have to talk about the women that we have to tell the whole story, basically, right? Why did they hire Dr. King at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church? Because they thought that they were getting a respectable Negro who wouldn't rock the boat. And who recruited Dr. King to be a part of the Montgomery bus boycott, because he didn't come up with the idea by himself, right? So I think that the onus is on many of us, those who do teach, those who do tell stories, those who organize, for us to be careful in the way that we tell these stories so that everybody understands that we need leaderful movements, right? And that all of us have the potential and the power to be a part of that 3.5%.
Other question? Awesome. Well, we said it with tonight.
Any other questions, comments, bribes, money, threats?
Can you talk to us more about the myths that people have around organizing and what it takes to create change? You mentioned it earlier, but can you go more into that?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple, but I'm happy to talk about some of those. Sometimes, especially when I'm with other Black people, and I could be wrong about this because we're not a monolith, right? And I have limited scope, but in my experience, I feel like a lot of us just don't really believe that we can win. Like I just get this sense that a lot of us don't really, and I say part of this because, like, you know, in my normal life, I make music, and I'm around a lot of folks who don't read the stuff that I've read and don't go to rallies and don't go to protests and don't organize. And the thing that a lot of my colleagues in those other spaces are trying to do is win at the game of capitalism. Like, that is their idea of liberation, is that if I can just make enough money, I won't have to worry about this stuff anymore. And to me, that is an example of what I mean when I say, like, I get the sense that a lot of us don't really believe that we can win, and we don't believe that we can win. We go into all these other directions of trying to survive and trying to thrive. So I think that to address some of the myths, like one myth, for instance, is like the myth of respectability, right? If we just comport ourselves in a respectable way, we'll be fine, right? We'll be free in some way, right? Not true, right? I keep reminding people, like, Dr. King had a suit on when they shot him in the head. I think, you know, so did Malcolm X. You know, they wore suits every day. You know, they comported themselves very well. You know, and so that is kind of weaponized against us when we're organizing, because then people just start talking about our tone, right? When we say things like F the police, defund the police, shut the, you know, the whole system is guilty as hell, things like that. People are like, you're gonna attract more flies with honey than you will with vinegar, which first off, it's not even scientifically true. Like, flies love landing on shit, raw meat, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, like, it's not even scientifically true, you know, but it's definitely not true that it's also not true that, you know, people have won their freedom simply by speaking to their oppressor nicely. Even Gandhi, who spoke to his oppressors very nicely, he wrote very polite letters to the British Viceroy, but the letters didn't do it. He still had to organize millions of Indians to go and break the law against making their own salt. So that's one myth. It's like, it's not necessarily about being mean, but it's also not about winning the approval of your oppressor. You have to organize power. You know, that's the thing. You have to, and you have to intervene against the flow of racist power by building a power of our own. Another myth that I would say, something that I say often, is like this thing about coming to the table. You know, I tell people coming to the table is overrated. First off, we're not even asking what they're doing at the table, right? Like, if they're running a white supremacist regime at the table, you having a leadership position at the table doesn't seem to help very much of anything. But what I'm really trying to talk about is polarization. There is actually a certain type of polarization that has always worked for change, right? That's what the civil rights movement was doing. They were polarizing issues that previously were just considered normal, and that if you had asked white people under Jim Crow, is all well in Birmingham, they'd have said, of course there. Of course there is, you know. And if you had asked a bunch of white neutrals during that time, I can't find this survey again, but I found it in 2016 and I can't find it again. So if anybody knows what I'm talking about and you have the link, please send it to me. I'll give you my information. But they asked white people under Jim Crow, and there were white people living under Jim Crow that genuinely believed that black people had the same opportunities that they did in society. They really believed separate but equal. So what the civil rights movement had to do was bring this problem out into the open, had to dramatize it in front of everyone. And it did polarize people. It drew a line in the sand. It said, which side are you on? Nice white liberal? Are you on the side of Bull Connor, or are you on our side? And these people were masters at polarizing people, just enough to get some policies passed, you know. But now, like, when we talk, I mean, for instance, I think it was 2018, 2017, I think it was 2018. Maxine Waters had said something about confronting Trump supporters wherever they are, right? And all these people had gotten upset about her saying, no, get in their face. And Chuck Schumer was on the floor of, I don't remember, what's Chuck? He's a senator? So he must have been on the floor of the Senate. Deductive reasoning. So he was on the floor of the Senate talking about like how to protest. But if you really listen to what he said, and I was listening to what he said, by the end of it is like, you basically told us to do nothing. Because there's this idea that what we have to do is just be nice about it, you know? So these are the kind of myths that I'm saying. And the other thing that I would say too is the myth of the power of one. Individuals are powerful. For instance, there was this woman named Ellen Urson in 2017. She was on an airplane. She saw that they were deporting a refugee, an asylum seeker, to Afghanistan, where he had never been before. And she knew that if he was deported there, he would have been killed. So she, by herself, stood up on the airplane, and prevented it from taking off because they're not going to take off with someone who won't. And they didn't want to take her because she's a white woman. So they, I thought about that the other day. I was like, she'd have got dragged out. I'd have got dragged off that plane, right? But she used her white woman privilege and stood up and at least delayed him being deported back to Afghanistan. So I say that to say individuals can be powerful. That is a classification of nonviolent action that we call direct intervention. Direct interventions usually take less people than something like protest or civil disobedience. However, I just think one of the biggest, and this I hope this hits someone in the heart, but I think one of the biggest myths about how we pursue change is that we can do it without collective action and we can do it without disrupting the status quo. Every time I talk about this with people, you have no idea how many groups I get invited to speak at, how many activist circles I get to speak at, how many churches ask me to speak, universities, and I always come in saying, okay, I know y'all don't want to hear this, but when you talk about Dr. King and the civil rights movement, what they did was put their bodies in places that the regime didn't want their bodies to be. At times that they didn't want them to show up. Those kids in Birmingham flooded the jail cells. Children. Those when you see those pictures of the water hoses and the dogs, those are kids, right? And that seems to be the piece that a lot of people don't want to do. I've talked to people so much. Okay, one more myth, right? I can do this all night, I swear. One more though, is that we don't have, here's the biggest one. If we just get enough people out in the street chanting the same thing at the same time, then we could defund the police, we could abolish prisons, insert whatever it is. If we just get enough people in the street, M&Ms will fall from the sky and we'll never have to think about whatever that oppressive policy was again, right? And the thing that and I do talk about this in the book, like we actually have to, so many people in the world of nonviolent organizing, nonviolent movements use this rubric where you imagine that the problem that you're trying to fight is like an ancient Roman temple. The roof, in this case, is systemic racism. All the pillars that sustain the roof are the different institutions in that society that uphold that problem. And you actually have to think about which of these institutions does your group that wants to do this, because remember, you're not trying to organize everybody, you're trying to organize 3.5%, right? So your group, what pillar does your group actually have the power to move, right? And then go about it, right? You actually do have to think about this stuff. What do you want? Who can give it to you? And how can you compel them to do that non-violently, right? These are things that, and I say this because I've been on the street with people who really are literally we don't want to think about what we're doing. We just want to block this one intersection in downtown Pasadena and dance for an hour. And I'm like, yo, I will do the wobble with you. You know what I'm saying? I'm down. However, if, for instance, just one example with this myth, I remember we had called ourselves doing an occupation at City Hall in Pasadena, which we shouldn't have done because we did not have a plan. It was the hottest week of the summer. It was during COVID, and but we did anyway. We got ran off the premises by the police. We had to sleep on the ground at this church across the street who gave us sanctuary. Next morning, lead organizer says, all right, we're gonna march down to the mayor's house and tell him to fire the police chief. And I said, why would we do that when the mayor doesn't have that kind of power in this city? So there's this myth that we can win it with passion and we can win it with numbers and no strategy. So those are some things that I would throw out there.
Okay, so I remember you bringing up the whole delusion of the white moderate, essentially. I'm from Meridian, Mississippi, by way of Florida. There is a Confederate statue in the center of town, in which, of course, after I leave, because I decided to transfer to Columbus in order to get up here, I take notice of the fact that Mississippi is supposedly becoming more and more proactive. Now, on the surface level, that sounds amazing, especially for all the races has Meridian, Mississippi. It's exactly what you think. All the passive aggressive white people, everything that you hear, a lot of the stereotypes are somehow true, and that disheartens me. Me being that kid that came from the place, I like me saying that to you right now. I feel like I'm not proud of it, specifically because of the fact that that change that happens supposedly is full of people that are somehow upholding the status quo on the other side of the situation. There's moderates on both sides. I want to know, how do you feel about silence from this point on nowadays? Like silence, like you just talked about, basically the silence of reasoning, saying that you can win with passion, one of those myths. How do you feel that people can defend against that nowadays? Like how do you feel? Hold up, because I'm trying to stop this question from sounding perfectionist. How do you feel about people blindly upholding the silence of reasoning, using passion in this sort of scenario, and they're not really helped? How do you feel about that? People supposedly being capable of this change, of acquiring this 3.5%, people following through, denouncing all of these myths, yet somehow becoming less effective than they were in the first place. How does one defend against that?
Okay, let me just make sure I understand your question. So is the question about people who talk a good game, but basically aren't doing anything?
Exactly. They talk a good game, they have everything in place, and yet they're right at the front door, ready to knock on the right person's door, and they don't.
Let me, Delonte mentioned, like, I try to be honest, and I'm not gonna lie, like, I haven't done a book event in a while because a part of my experience has been like, I got into this work because I really wanted to help. I still really do want to help, but I feel like I've seen a darker side of not just the publishing world, but also the organizing and activism space, social justice spaces and people who claim to be about that life. And what I will say is there's a great book called Full Spectrum Resistance by Eric McBay. And what he talks about is how the left has a culture of defeat. And he goes through all these characteristics of the culture of defeat. And when I was reading about it at first, it's called Full Spectrum Resistance. And when I first reading about it, I was like, man, thank God I ain't run into that culture of defeat yet.
Meanwhile, you grew up.
But then 2020 happened. Now, when I started really getting active between 2014 and 2016, it was all Black people in the street. When someone got killed by the police, it was Black Lives Matter rally, it was Black people in the street. 2020, there were some towns where it was just white people in the street after George Floyd was murdered, right? And what became clear to me in my experience, and this is partly why I'm in Medellin right now. I've been in Colombia for the past 6-7 weeks, and I was in Jamaica before that, because I literally had another Black Lives Matter activist making threats on my life in my city. And I got calls from other people telling me, like, don't go back to Pasadena, don't right? Now, I will say, I don't know how seriously I'm supposed to take a death threat. I'm not gonna lie. You know what I'm saying? I'm not taking those chances either. But I bring that example to say that this is a question that I've actually been wrestling with personally, is that there are a lot of people who do talk a good game and say that they're about that life. But at the end of the day, what they want is attention, or they want the book deal, they want the speaking engagement, they want the clout, they want money, they want, they get awards, because at the end of the day, if you do get into this work in the way that Delonte has, the way that I have, there are people that do revere you in some ways. So Man, I'm gonna get in trouble because I try to keep it real, all the way real, all the time. I try to. I'm not always good at it, so I'm just gonna share something with y'all. I hope that it's not too triggering for y'all, but like 2 weeks before my book came out, I was hospitalized because I was suicidal. I did not care if this book came out. I didn't care. It didn't matter because that's where I'm coming from. If you buy the book, I don't know if I'm gonna get any money. I haven't seen a check since the book came out. I haven't seen a royalty. I'm not doing this to sell books. I'm doing this because I want to change the world. And so like, I had so much faith and energy that I invested in the movement. Like I told you, I'll sleep on the ground at some church, running from the police for this life. You know what I'm saying? And the short answer to your question, because I'm going around, is I don't know what to do about the people who are not actually serious about this. I don't know. It breaks my heart. You ask me how I feel, it breaks my heart. It has made me feel at some points like it's all bullshit, you know? These people want to be on NBC or MSNBC and talk with Al Sharpton. Nothing against Al Sharpton, but this is what they want to do. Like this is what they're after, because basically they found a way to get influence and prestige, and they're not practicing principled struggle. So they come into movement spaces and some of them even call themselves dictators. You know what I'm saying? Like, it happens. I don't know what to do about them, and how I feel about them is it breaks my heart. But this is what I do know. We can't quit because of them. We can't stop because of them, That's all I know. All I know is that, I'm getting choked up, is that I don't even know most of y'all, and I care about you. I slept on that ground at that church because I care about you. When you started talking, I was like, I like his blackness. I do. I like your blackness. Like, and that's just where I'm coming from, All I know is that we can't quit. I don't mean like burn ourselves out trying to do it and run ourselves into the ground doing it. All I know is like when we meet these people that they say that they're about it, but really they're on something else. What I'm trying to do is put them into a larger context too, so that I don't get bitter. Because what my dad tells me to do, my dad was like a real anti-imperialist activist for a while from Jamaica. He don't like talking about it. I ain't learned this until later on, until I was an adult. But my dad is always like, man, Andre, you be trying to take care of everybody else so much, and you need to just go make money. Just go make money, But I can't, I mean, not that I can't make money. I mean, I actually can't make money. How do you make money? I digress. I digress. I digress. But I mean, that is what people say, like, just go make money. But all I'm saying is, and I know I'm taking a long time on this question, is that I try to put them in a larger context. A lot of people have suffered so much under this domination system that the minute they get a chance to feel safe as individuals or feel powerful or whatever, they take it in a selfish way. And that's sad. But we can't internalize that, We just have to keep on finding the good people. I don't mean good, I mean the helpers. I don't want to make a binary good and bad people. We're all good. Some of us do bad things. But we just have to keep finding the helpers and keep finding people that we can work with, people that we trust, right? And if we can, even invite those people who break trust into some kind of reconciliation, right? Because like, we keep talking about it. Like I don't know if you're an abolitionist, a lot of people like talking about restorative justice, transformative justice, abolition, all that kind of stuff. Sounds like a good idea. It reminds me when I used to be a pastor and we all used to talk about following Jesus, but not many people actually wanted to do it, you know? And I'm like, man, like this abolition stuff sounds good, but if we're gonna build this new world, we gotta start somewhere. It's frustrating. So I'll tell you what I do, and I have a whole chapter on this too. And if you don't, I'm not trying to get you to buy the book by me telling you this is a chapter, right? So like if you're like, listen, I ain't got it, I'll buy the book for you. But I have this whole book, I have this whole chapter about hope. And what I learned for myself is that, like, first off, I didn't think I could be a hopeful person. Like 2017, you and I were at the police station every Thursday. So we were doing this year-long vigil because one of our neighbors was killed by the police. And we started in 2016. By March of 2017, I was so depressed because it felt like it was getting worse. Donald Trump was the president now. I'm like, 80% of evangelicals voted for him.
This man dominated the polls in his community specifically.
I was like, and the reason I felt like I couldn't be hopeful is because all the quote unquote hopeful people that I knew were not paying attention to the news. So like all the optimists that I knew were optimistic for no reason. I'm like, why are you hopeful? And then like, I just am, right? And that just wasn't enough for me. So my friend Paul, who's a professor in Florida, sent me a book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. And that book changed my life because Rebecca Solnit proposed to the reader that maybe hope is not a feeling, but a habit. Maybe hope is not based on you being sure about things turning out good, but about you actually not knowing how things will turn out. And in that space of uncertainty, giving you the space to act. So I keep telling people, starting to get chills, right? History is not a story that is happening to us. It's one that we're writing together. We write that story through collective action, right? And so when I look around, stuff can be really discouraging, stuff can be really frustrating. But the thing that keeps me going is realizing that I don't know what will happen. And I don't even know what's likely to happen. And if I think about what's likely to happen, I might be depressed too. But I know what can happen. I know what could happen if. And I just got to hold on to that. There's a crack in the door for now. And I just got to keep working for that and working with people who can do that. So I'm sorry, y'all. I took so long on that. I said so much, but that's what I got.
Let's give it one more time for Andre Henry. Thank you, brother, for allowing us all to eavesdrop on the brilliance of your integrity and the brilliance of your commitment to our collective liberation. Thank you for allowing us to eavesdrop on your own pain, but also the ways that you hold on to purpose and hope in the midst of a really, y'all forgive me, but a really fucked up world. And so I'm really grateful to count you as my friend. It's been hard. It's been hard for those of us who do know some of the things that continue to happen in movement spaces. I'm just grateful that every now and then I can pick up the phone and we can talk. And I'm grateful that I get to share my friendship with you, with my friends.
and with the folks that I try to pastor, and the community that I chose to live in. So just thank you, man. Thank you, brother. Please buy the book, support this brother, help this brother know how much we love him and how much we appreciate who he is and what he is sharing with our world. This brother is offering an island in the midst of a sea of despair. And everybody that is in here who has been here tonight, I believe that we have been able to dip our toe just for an evening in some reprieve. So I want to encourage you as you go to just remember what it felt like. Remember what it feels like when the possible is revealed to you. Remember what it feels like when your feet that are so tired can rest for a while. Remember what it feels like, because we need you. We need you in the work that lies ahead. We need you. We need each other in this practice of hope. So with that, I want to invite up Michaela for any final words and give another round of applause to Sankofa Video and Bookstore.
Thank you for your honesty, and thank you, Pastor Delonte, for being here, facilitating those questions. I can't, I have nothing else to say after that. Just thank you so much. Thank you all in the audience for being here tonight. If you do want to get your books signed, you have them up here. You can just purchase them in the back and come back up. With that, I hope everyone has a great evening. Stay safe, stay hopeful, and we'll see y'all at the next event. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.